Okay, once you found your spectrum, it's time to process it. And the way you do that is you click on the Process tab, and that opens up a new set of icons. The one we're going to deal with first is this Calibrate Axis icon, and that is used to set the chemical shift. So when you take a spectrum, the spectrometer tries to determine what the chemical shift of the peaks should be, and it generally does a pretty good job of this. But sometimes it doesn't. And so we have to know how to do this manually. And the solvent we're using for this experiment is D2O, and there's a tiny amount of another compound called TSP in that solvent. And TSP is a chemical shift standard that's always set to 0. So if you look at the chemical shift here, you can see there's a peak that's centered around 0. And so the spectrometer actually did a really good job of setting this for us. If it didn't, you can click on the Calibrate Axis tab. With this icon being yellow, you simply click on the center of the peak that you want to set. Okay, so we want this peak to be set to 0 chemical shift. So 0.00 and you hit enter, and that changes the chemical shift for that peak, and thus changes the chemical shift for all the peaks in the spectrum. Now, sometimes you have a solvent molecule in which you can look up the chemical shift for that. So for example, the solvent peak in this case shows up here. And so if we wanted to look up where this peak for D2O, which is actually HOD, so there's a hydrogen present, we could look that up in a table and set the chemical shift for this peak too. But generally, if there's an internal chemical shift standard, that's the one you want to set. And in this case, it's set to 0.